on with the one and only, the man himself of the hour, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a great friend of this show. Happy New Year, Michael. How you doing, man? You doing all right today?
I'm great. I've already started to shovel the snow outside, and all's good.
Have you? Yeah, it's snowing in Richmond. So yeah, it's snowing here too. I went out this morning, or at the very least, when I look out the window this morning, you have this nice little thin thread of snow covering everything.
We have about 5 inches right now.
Where are you located? You're in DC, or where are you?
In Reston, just outside of DC.
Oh, so you're okay. See, I just left DC Friday, so I don't necessarily know what's going on the ground up there. But wow, just be careful.
It all happened after midnight, and it's going to continue throughout the day and into the night.
Oh, that's unfortunate because I need to drive to DC.
Well, we only get this once every 3 to 4 years, and anything beyond an inch is a snowmageddon here. You know that.
People freak out. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, there's an inch of snow. So I want you on because, and I'm really appreciate you coming on because I wanted to get into this quote unquote counteroffensive that Ukraine apparently launched over the weekend. That they're doubling down in Kiev, which is wild to me because the reality of it is they seem to acknowledge at this point that this war is lost. And even if you listen to Blinken, when Blinken, they were asking him, hey, do you have any expectation that Ukraine is going to take any territory? And the answer was no. And so, you want them to mobilize their children, 18-year-olds, I consider 18-year-olds kids. You want to mobilize their teenagers. You acknowledge that there's no real expectation that they're really going to do anything militarily in that mobilization, short of getting those people killed. And now they did this buildup just before Joe Biden left, giving all of this money, weapons, et cetera, for an offensive in Kursk. Why are they continuing to double down in Kursk when they seem to be losing more and more territory in the Donbas region? Karahovo has just been liberated or fallen, depending upon your point of view. So they're losing in the area that the main conflict is taking place on the Donbas line, while simultaneously doubling down in Kursk that doesn't really have a military significance. What is going on here? Explain this to us. Make this work for us.
Well, you've asked a very interesting question because even strategists have a hard time figuring out what was the strategy, what was the point. And I think if you're to push this to an extreme, you could say, well, it was to try and gain leverage in any future negotiation. Okay, well, in taking over the Kursk region or invading the Kursk region, which was doomed from the start, not even the Nazis during World War II could achieve that with a full bore war machine. The Ukrainians pulled troops out of the Donbas area, which is precisely the region where the Russians just made a breakthrough this morning. So major breakthrough. So it's you have to ask the question, what's the strategy here? And again, the only conceivable notion is to gain leverage to swap territories, and that's doomed to failure because the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, in essence, have been contained. They are and they haven't been killed, but they did lose a considerable number of troops just in the taking of this major city and in the Donbas region, which opens up the territory westward into the rest of Ukraine if Russia so desires. But it does capture the what is a major hub for the Russians, and you have Ukrainian troops contained up in the Kursk Oblast, which is a Russian Federation territory. It's just not going to work. They'll be lucky they can get those troops back alive. Yeah. And I think that just in the Kosovo area, they lost 80% of their troops in that latest onslaught, and captured tremendous amounts of or destroyed a lot of ordnance and armor, and this. I mean, it's armor that they're limited in. And you mentioned the mobilization efforts to sacrifice troops like this. The Ukrainians are desperate for manpower, and they want to get the kids. I'm hearing anywhere from 15 to 18 now. They want to mobilize. This is I think the Ukrainian people, or what's left of them, need to rise up and say, we've had enough of this crap, and do something about it on their own. They've got to take action.
Well, in the Gallup polling, it showed that the majority at this point wanted it to stop. Like literally the majority for the first time said, stop. Even if we have to give up territory, we want it to stop. And I guess my thing is this kind of dichotomy between the main conflict is taking place for Donbas. It's like 1,000-kilometer front. It's everybody understands it in that context. And yet they've doubled down in Kursk. So not only did they go for an offensive, and that offensive has effectively failed, as you point out, they're retained. They continued to do another offensive in Kursk after getting this kind of buildup of weapons from Joe Biden just before he left, like on his way out. It doesn't make sense to me. Like you are losing, like for example, recently Russia has just taken Karakovo. They've just raised the flag over it in its entirety, which, as you point out, gives them open step. Once they get to Bartrovsk is going to be one of the next main hubs. But after that, it's just open step to the Dnieper. They have to know this. They have to be aware of this. And yet they're still messing around in Kursk, something to which they've already been contained in. I guess they're trying to get a breakthrough from the Russian lines in that case. I don't get the military significance. I just don't. Is it really just negotiations?
As I said, strategists are scratching their heads over it too. I think Blinken, in his comments this morning, conceded that it was to gain leverage for territorial swap. But anytime Blinken opens his mouth, he steps his foot in it. So I think he just should shut up and leave. He's just useless. And but that's just my personal opinion. But but the reality is they're desperate. The Ukrainians are desperate. You even have Zelensky now appealing to Trump to in exchange for the frozen assets of Russian or the interest on frozen assets, Russian assets. He wants to pay for more arms, and he's appealing to the incoming Trump administration to do that. I don't think Trump wants that. He has his designs. He has his priorities elsewhere, and Ukraine certainly is not one of them. He wants to settle it, get it over with, and move on. It's just like he wants to get rid of this problem. He has another focus, and that is on the United States internally, cleaning up internally inside the United States by the mess and the self-inflicted wounds that the Biden administration has imposed upon the American people for the last 4 years. And if you look at his evolving strategy, it is more in our U.S. region. He's looking more in terms of another reintroducing, if you will, the notion of a spheres of influence. And Ukraine would be in the Russian sphere of influence, and Greenland, Panama, and what's the other place he wants to take over?
Canada. Right.
That is his sphere of influence, and there's active discussion about these things going on. That is his priority, and people say, well, why Greenland? It's just nothing but a hunk of ice. Well, they have not only valuable resources, but Greenland also is a very strategic location. We have bases up in the northern part of Greenland to monitor activities in the Arctic region, and it also is meant to basically assist in our mutual defense with Canada. So his interests are more in our region as opposed to dealing with questionable wars and ancient wars and in other parts of the world, like in Europe. I mean, we've bailed them out twice. How many more times do we have to do it? And you know, and now they're bringing, and they want to resurrect centuries old alliances and reestablish those alliances. We see that with Poland, with Lithuania. They used to have a joint republic back in the 15th century. You know, are we going to get involved in that? No. And that's why Poland, for example, latched on to becoming a NATO member. They wanted to use NATO for that purpose. Well, I see NATO fracturing. You're not going to get 32 members of NATO to come up with a unanimous approach on anything any longer. And I think that's why you're going to see the beginning of the end of NATO for sure. And they're going to probably fracture into more regional alliances, defense alliances, like Scandinavian, European, African, and so on.
I want to play this clip because you mentioned it with Zelensky. But I also want to bounce back for a moment to Europe, because Europe, they don't seem to understand that they're being damaged in their association with NATO. It's very weird to me. I mean, first things first, this is Zelensky having this conversation. I mean, there's a few of these clips that are just fantastic. When one of them, they ask him, does Putin love Russia? And he goes on this tirade as if the answer is no. It's very bizarre. But in this case, he's talking about Trump. And he is attacking Biden kind of with a backhand slap as he basically shows fealty and allegiance to Donald Trump.
He was stronger. He was much more stronger than Kamala Harris, Biden first, and then Kamala Harris. Yes, he showed that he can intellectually and physically. It was an important point to show that if you want to have a strong country, you have to be strong. And he was strong. And this number of rallies, what I said, is not a simple thing. He showed that he can. He is strong. So he doesn't have any questions with his, this age and etc. Nothing. He is young. He is young here, and his brains work. So I think it's important.
He's young. Sorry. He's young here, and his brains work. That I didn't realize that was an issue, but now clearly this is aimed at Joe Biden, effectively saying Joe Biden is not quite in his right mind. And look, man, he is. I would imagine that they are going to have to use surgery to remove his lips off of Trump's ass. Because he is clearly kissing ass in this interview.
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. Yeah, I agree with you. He's trying to butter up now. He recognizes that the torch has passed with respect to Biden. Yep. Biden came through for him. I mean, to date, the United States has provided some $300 billion in military and financial assistance to Ukraine. That's a sizable chunk of change. Yeah. And yet it wasn't enough. And combined with the other allied countries of NATO, it just wasn't enough. It clearly showed that his strategy was inept. Even if he was going to go to war, to even contemplate that against the Russian Federation was folly in the first place. But now to do this and cater. I mean, the man lacks authority. He's under martial law. His term had expired as president. Mm-hmm. He and the Russians refused to negotiate with him personally because of his legal standing in the Ukrainian government. So they're going to have to do something. That's why I'm saying it's time for the Ukrainian people to take the initiative and make things right, to try to settle this thing once and for all. And that means that they need on their own to settle this thing. Otherwise, it's going to take out. I presume they want the United States to come in and plant another government that will be doomed to failure, because all of our regime change efforts to date, from Libya to Afghanistan to Iraq, have failed. So if this is what they want, I think it's folly, and we need to move on and shut it down and move on.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that part too, because there was something that Zelensky said in relation to that one also, where he's saying that effectively this interview was weird because for one, he's speaking in 3 different languages. He's speaking in English, Ukrainian, and Russian. He doesn't seem to speak in Ukrainian well, so he keeps going back to Russian in regards to the way he's giving the speech. So right off the bat, it's a little bit strange. In this case, though, he's talking about Trump, effectively saying that world leaders look to Trump. Again, surgically remove his lips from Trump's ass. That world leaders are looking at Trump for some level of idea on what is going to take place in the world. Now, that's astonishing when you think about it. Like, he is in the middle of a war, and he is effectively admitting that this is going to be something they're going to have to go to Trump in order to resolve, that he is not master of his own domain in the context of the war. That by itself is a pretty heavy admission. But I want to get your take on what he's saying.
It won't be long.
About how, I think I'm paraphrasing, but they look to him and he looks to the US or something to that effect. But I want to get your take on this commentary.
Because Europe will be looking at us and will be looking at Trump. And by the way, I now see that when I talk about something with Donald Trump, whether we meet in person or we just have a call, all the European leaders always ask, how was it? This shows the influence of Donald Trump. And this has never happened before. With an American president, I tell you, from my experience.
You know, what's wild about this clip, and I think the most maybe disturbing thing about the clip, under normal circumstances, and I want to get your take on it, under normal circumstances, when a country is at war, that country themselves are making decisions about what's in their best interests for the war. And when you get to a certain point where they're like, okay, we can't proceed, we can't win this, we're going to stop because we're trying to save our own people, we're going to save the territory that we have and come to some kind of agreement and some kind of a deal. Zelensky is not in a position to make that deal. And not just not in a position, when he wanted to make the deal for the Istanbul agreements, he was not allowed to make that deal by Western forces led by Boris Johnson coming into the country representing, of course, America in doing so. And to make it even worse, even now, if you notice, he says, well, Europe looks to us and we look to America. Basically, America is going to be the end all be all in whether or not the war continues or the war stops. But think about what that means, though. That means that a country that is not your own is making decisions on your own people's life and death issues. Whereas the Ukrainians may at a certain point want to stop because it's not in their best interest to continue. Well, we are the ones who are making the choice, not Ukrainians. This is not about whether or not this is in America's best interest for Americans to fight. This is whether or not it's in America's best interest for Ukraine to keep fighting. That's a weird dynamic on the battlefield. Give me your take on that. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that, first of all?
No, I think I think he has conceded defeat without saying so. He's almost like a dog who is put on its back and shows its belly and concedes. I mean, in a dog fight. I mean, this is. I mean, he now realizes that following the advice of the Europeans brought him to the point where he is now, and also the Europeans can no longer support him. So where else do you turn? To the United States, because they remain the superpower. And but Trump has another agenda, as I pointed out earlier. The reality is that Europe itself will not be able to do anything to assist him, and I think he's basically conceding that, and he's appealing for U.S. support, but it's too little, too late, and the United States gave what it could in association with other NATO countries to back him up, but he failed. He failed because the Biden administration for the last 4 years left it up to the Zelensky to figure out how to conduct that war, and that was a total disaster, and he lacked basic elements. For example, air power. If he was going to fight a war, you want to have your air power. He didn't have the air power, and so he resorted to drones, which is a poor substitute. Although it's like bad. It's like swatting mosquitoes. with these drones. It's not like being bombed with 500-pound bombs from an F-16. You know, it's different, and you need, and it allowed Russia to bring in its heavy armor, and being in the middle of winter now, the territory that the frozen land is ideal for them to start moving that and to move their troops in, and also you use air power to bomb minefields. I mean, Russia had the luxury of the time to lay out miles of mines for the tanks against the Ukrainians, and they just lost 80% of their armor in this latest fiasco in the Donbas. I mean, it's just I mean, it's suicide, and they again, the Ukrainian people need to say enough, and the Europeans have already basically telegraphing that. They're saying enough, because they are just about out of storage of their own natural gas and basic resources. They don't have the industrial capacity and infrastructure to switch over to a war production. They just don't have it.
Yeah, they couldn't do it if they wanted to.
And it's going to take them a generation. It's going to take them a generation to recover from what they have lost now in terms of the quality of life, and the people themselves are against continuing this thing, because they see that it's not amounting to anything. It's actually driving them greater and greater into economic upheaval.
Right. So why do European leaders continue with this nonsense then? I mean,
it's the leaders. The people. The leadership has one set of ideas. The people have another. It's up to the people now, and we're seeing this in Europe with the rise of more of the the right wing types coming in, and they're gaining popularity. And if short of a violent revolution, if they can do it through the ballot box, that's probably going to be the answer. But clearly, Trump has shown more of a brought back the populist notion, and the Europeans want the same thing. They're beginning to show that, you know what, this effort is futile, and they need to take charge of their own destiny, in effect, rather than just worrying about Ukraine. They got to worry about themselves now because of their economic and political plight.
Is Russia going to attack the oil pipelines? Ukraine has stopped oil going to Europe. They've effectively saying, well, this is no longer going to take place. We're not going to renew the contracts. So Europe is now going without Russian oil coming through Ukraine. Apparently there's another one going through, Jamarl pipeline in Turkey. But for all intents and purposes, for the Ukrainian pipelines, it has stopped. And Europe is going to have to somehow make up the oil or the gas that they're going to miss. They're going to pay it.
I don't think they'll attack them. I don't think they'll attack the pipelines because they see that again as a source of future revenue gain. And Putin has basically signaled as much that he wants them to reconsider and start getting back on track and be smart about it and start getting cheaper oil and gas and get off this kick of trying to dominate or take over or bust up the Russian Federation. It is not going to happen. I haven't been to Russia twice last year. And spoken to Russian people. They are more solid than ever behind Putin.
Do you think that we can ever go back to that norm? Or do you think, meaning, because the U.S. had a clear interest in this, right? I mean, from one point of view, we didn't like the idea that there was a pipelines connecting Europe to Russia. We wanted them to buy our gas, not the Russian gas. We were able to blow up Nord Stream, so we were able to accomplish that. We were able to poison the relationship between Europe and between Russia. So that, again, also was an accomplishment. All of these things were American objectives that were not in the interests of Europe, but the European leaders still went along with it under this kind of fig leaf of Ukraine. Do you think they get back to common sense? Or do you think, no, we're in a new era where there's this kind of bifurcation of the world between Eastern and Western spheres? What are your thoughts?
I think inevitably there is that division. It will remain. We've had to bail Europe out of 2 wars already, and they just seem to have a suicidal bent on engagement and historically against Russia. The history of the UK against Russia goes back centuries, and we've discussed that. They've also and it goes back to the days when there was a British Empire, particularly such as in Central Asia, when they were competing for influence in that region. And the UK has never forgiven the Russians. Has never forgiven the Russians for that, and as a consequence, this animosity continues. And as I may have said, I keep telling some of my British friends, look, you guys still think you're an empire, but larger than the state of Indiana.
I know.
And
but you're this tiny little country.
Crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. They've got to get their mind into the 21st century rather than the 18th and 17th centuries, and get back into the 21st century and consider where they are right now, because they have a lot now of catching up to do as a result of supporting this war. And also, the world is more dangerous because of the existence now of hypersonic missiles, which give them warning times of like 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a different world.
It is, and I think Putin has really been restrained and is waiting for Trump to come on board. They will talk. There's no question about it. They will talk. You raised another interesting point on trust. The Russians don't trust the West and the United States in particular. It was under Trump, frankly, that they sustained most of the sanctions and lost property that they purchased in the United States. This is, and they've told me in the past, they really despise being talked down to. They want to be treated as an equal strategic partner. And I think that, but you got Trump now bringing in the likes of Kellogg and Ortega once again. I mean, it just never ends. He's got to get rid of these neocons. These neocons are the ones who are pushing this narrative of not only supporting Netanyahu, but also supporting the containment of Russia, rather than treating them as an equal partner and working things out with them.
Russia wants,
we have to rebuild that trust. We have to rebuild that trust. And I think in Trump's second administration, he'll have that ability if he chooses to do so, because he no longer has hanging over his head the conspiracy hoaxes of Russian collusion for getting voted in and all that crap. He had to deal with that during that time period when he sanctioned Russia, in order to show that he didn't have that that closeness with Russia.
Yeah, it came within context.
And it hurt our relationship as a consequence.
I'm curious. I mean, Russia seems to want a new security architecture of Europe, not just the end of the war. And it's like the war ending, all of that stuff gets lumped into, okay, what is the new security architecture of Europe? Do you think they're going to get that? Meaning, do you think whatever this end to this war is, that will be by definition this kind of new security architecture and a platform to build a relationship?
I think it's inevitable to happen. As I pointed out, I think it's got to begin with the fracturing of NATO. I think the reality is that Trump coming on board says that in exchange for us to remain in NATO, you've got now to come up with 5% of your GDP to support yourself. They can't do it. They can't even do 2%. Many of them can't do. Most of them cannot do 2%. Some can do 3%, and certainly not 5%. The United States has been providing around 5% at least of GDP. So, and we can no longer support them because of our own financial issues that we have to deal with here. Yeah, 36 trillion. How do you pay that off? And there's going to be opposition. And it really is the beginning of the end for the United States if we can't cope with this and deal with it effectively and do it now. I mean, I hope it's not too late.
One last question before I let you go. HTS. Syria has gotten far more complicated in regards to the political relationships that have developed in Syria. And one of the most interesting ones has to do with this kind of relationship between Turkey and HTS, especially in the context of the Kurds. and for that matter, Lebanon. Because there's an expectation from people that I've spoken to on the ground that the moment that the ceasefire, and I'm putting that in quotes because Israel hasn't necessarily honored the ceasefire at all,
Right.
but the moment that that ceasefire is over with, that hostilities are going to erupt almost immediately right off the bat. And that the concern is that Lebanon is sandwiched between HTS, in one sense, a group of jihadists that have been doing these kind of border incursions into Lebanon, and Israel itself. Give me your take on this. I mean, this seems to be somewhat of a,
Well,
difficult
we're
position.
we're headed for a larger clash, if you will. Turkey cannot control HTS. HTS has told PKK, put down your arms. That satisfies Turkey on the one hand, but on the other hand, the clash ultimately, and Turkey cannot control HTS and Jelani, even though he's trying to give the outward appearance of wanting to be part of the international community. But
Right.
he has there are so many factions within his group that it's a question of time whether they'll be effectively be able to hold on to them. The other thing is the real clash ultimately, I think, will come between Turkey and Israel. Turkey is once again, because of its neo-Ottoman vision, will clash over much of the same territory as the Greater Israel concept that Netanyahu is professing. So I think that we have and also now he's taking the opportunity to talk once again, Netanyahu is, of going after Iran. He wants to drag the United States into bombing Iran. And he's got to he wants to get Trump locked in on that. I don't think Trump is going to go along with that. I hope not, because that will makes this a much larger regional conflict as a consequence, not just between them. And the Gulf Arab countries have been silent until now. But the one thing they don't want is Israel taking over all these lands. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, they don't want to live under another neo-Ottoman empire. So we got to see which direction they go. I think we need to watch what Saudi Arabia decides and says to Trump ultimately, because they still want a two-state solution for Palestine, and they want to get back to the 67 borders. Israel is against that. If they want normalization, it's not going to happen. So I think that the clashes are yet to come.
Does Saudi Arabia really want a two-state solution? I mean, like, I get the sense that the leadership doesn't care one way or the other. It's just political.
Well, that's
posturing.
What they're insisting on. They're insisting on it now. Before the October 7th, when you did the Abraham Accords, Palestine wasn't even in the discussion.
Right.
But now it is. It's now prominent. It's now because of the slaughter and the extermination that the Israelis did of the Palestinians. You've got all the Arab countries sympathetic to the Palestinians in that regard. They can't ignore it. They just cannot ignore it.
We will see. I don't get this. I don't know. I don't get the sense that they care. I mean, but you could be right. I mean, like you said, in the Abraham Accords, it wasn't a factor. But with the amount of bloodshed, maybe it's gotten to the point where the leadership is we
have seen a complete change in the political dynamic throughout the Middle East. Netanyahu changed everything. We're in an open, uncharted area now. All of the methods in the past of containing this or that, of trying to restrain other countries from going into warfare, have all been obliterated. We got a whole new concept now that's underway in the Middle East, and we just have to see how these players play. Turkey is going to be key, but Turkey is also aligned very closely with Russia and through Russia, Iran, and because if Iran is attacked, I think the Russians will intervene as a consequence.
One last question: on the issue of, I'll kill it. I'll stop it here because I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
Maybe another time. Huh?
Yeah, Michael, man, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Michael Ballou, he's a former senior policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. He's also a regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a good friend of this show, man. Thank you for this. You have a good day, all right?
You too. Thanks, Jamal.